They laughed when humanity presented their fleet to the Galactic Council. 12 ships, 12 primitive vessels with chemical rockets and kinetic weapons, crewed by soft-skinned mammals who had only discovered faster-than-light travel 3 decades ago. The Vortani ambassador called it adorable. The Kethari warlord suggested humans should return when they had a real navy. The entire chamber erupted in chittering, hissing amusement as Earth's representative stood in silence, her expression unreadable. That was 6 hours ago. Now, every sensor array in the galactic core is screaming. Every early warning system from the outer rim to the Council homeworld is detecting the same impossible signature, because those 12 ships were not humanity's fleet. Those 12 ships were humanity's invitation. And the real fleet, the one Earth has been building in secret for 30 years, the one hidden behind a gas giant in a system nobody thought to check, has just announced itself to a galaxy that forgot the most important rule of survival. Never mistake patience for weakness. 7,000 warships. And they are not here to negotiate. The story begins, as so many stories of first contact do, with a misunderstanding. Though perhaps misunderstanding is too gentle a word. Perhaps the more accurate term would be arrogance. The Galactic Council chamber on Veth Prime was a marvel of engineering that had stood for 11,000 years. Its crystalline dome stretched nearly 2 kilometers across, grown rather than built from the living mineral deposits of the planet's crust. Light filtered through panels of charged plasma, casting the assembled delegates in shifting hues of purple and gold. The chamber could hold representatives from over 400 species, though on this particular day, only the inner circle had been summoned. The 47 founding races of the Council, the oldest and most powerful civilizations in the known galaxy. They had gathered to witness what the Vortani ambassador had called the culmination of humanity's delusion. Ambassador Kira Okonkwo stood at the central podium, a raised platform of polished obsidian that placed her at eye level with even the tallest delegates. She was a small woman by human standards, barely reaching 160 centimeters, with dark skin that seemed to absorb the chamber's shifting light. Her hair was pulled back in tight braids, revealing the sharp lines of her jaw and the calm, almost serene expression she wore like armor. She had been chosen for this assignment specifically because of her ability to remain composed under pressure. The selection committee had tested her extensively. Psychological evaluations, stress simulations, even a mock interrogation designed to break her. She had passed every test with the same unflappable demeanor she displayed now. The dossier on her desk back on Earth contained a simple note from the Secretary General. She will not flinch. Behind her, projected on a holographic display that the Vortani had been kind enough to provide, hung the image of humanity's offering. 12 ships arranged in a standard defensive formation. Their hulls were gray and functional, lacking the elegant curves of Kethari warships or the geometric perfection of Vortani cruisers. They bristled with what the Council's sensors had identified as primitive railgun batteries, chemical rocket thrusters, and armor plating that the SH carry delegate had actually laughed at, his mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his species. "These are your weapons?" the SH carry had asked, his compound eyes reflecting the holographic display. "Solid projectiles propelled by magnetic acceleration? How quaint. My people abandoned such technology before your species learned to walk upright." Ambassador Okonkwo had simply nodded. "Yes, Delegate Thrix. Kinetic weaponry. We find it reliable." The chamber had rippled with laughter at that. Not human laughter, of course. The sound was cacophony of clicks, whistles, subsonic rumbles, and high-pitched keening that the translation implant in Okonkwo's ear converted to something approximating mirth. She had stood through it all, without a flicker of emotion crossing her face. That had been 2 hours into the presentation. 4 hours ago now, the Vortani ambassador had been the most vocal critic. High Exarch Varenthal was ancient even by his species standards, a towering figure nearly 3 meters tall, with scales the color of burnished copper and eyes that glowed with bioluminescent intensity. His species had been among the founding members of the Council. They had charted the galaxy while humanity's ancestors were still learning to chip flint into tools. This fact, and others like it, had been repeated approximately 16 times during the course of the session. "Let me ensure I understand correctly," Varental said now, his voice a deep rumble that reverberated through the chamber's acoustic systems. "You are requesting full membership in the Galactic Council. Membership that grants access to our trade networks, our technology sharing agreements, our mutual defense pacts. And in exchange, you offer..." He gestured at the holographic display with one clawed hand. The Terran Defense Fleet represents a culmination of 3 decades of development," Okonkwo replied. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying easily through the chamber systems. "Each vessel carries enough firepower to engage targets at distances exceeding. I have read your specifications, Ambassador." Varental's interruption was not quite rude by Council standards, but it was close. 12 vessels. Combined crew complement of approximately 4,000 individuals. Armament consisting primarily of magnetically accelerated projectiles and chemical explosive warheads. No energy shielding. No directed energy weapons. Hull composition of... He paused, consulting his personal display. Titanium alloys and composite ceramics. A murmur ran through the assembled delegates. The Kethari warlord, a massive figure encased in powered armor that hummed with barely contained energy, leaned forward in his seat. His species communicated primarily through pheromones and color shifts in their chromatophores, but the Council Chamber's translation systems converted his response to audible speech. "Our patrol craft carry more firepower than your entire fleet," he said. "Individual patrol craft. The vessels we use to inspect cargo haulers and chase down smugglers." More laughter. The sound washed over Okonkwo like a wave, and she let it pass without response. "Perhaps we should discuss the requirements for observer status instead," suggested the Nera delegate, a crystalline being whose body chimed softly with each movement. The Nereth were considered among the more diplomatic species in the Council. Their suggestion was almost kind by the standards of the Chamber. Humanity clearly has much to learn before they can be considered peers. "With respect, delegate," Okonkwo said, "we are not requesting observer status. We are requesting full membership, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." "On what grounds?" Varental demanded. "On the grounds that we have met every requirement set forth in your charter. We have achieved faster-than-light travel. We have established colonies beyond our home system. We have made peaceful contact with multiple species. And we have demonstrated the ability to defend ourselves against external threats." "Defend yourselves?" The Kethari warlord rose from his seat, his armor hissing as servos compensated for the movement. "With this..." He jabbed an armored finger at the holographic display. "Ambassador, I have personally commanded fleets that would reduce your 12 ships to vapor in the time it takes me to give the order. The Kethari Imperium fields over 90,000 combat vessels. 90,000. You bring us 12 and expect us to pretend this represents meaningful capability. We are not asking you to pretend anything, Warlord Kethros." Okonkwo's voice remained level. "We are asking you to accept our application for membership based on the criteria established in your own charter. The charter also requires that applicant species demonstrate the ability to contribute meaningfully to the Council's collective security." Varental interjected. 12 vessels cannot meaningfully contribute to anything except perhaps target practice for our Academy cadets." This drew the loudest response yet. Several delegates actually rose from their seats, their equivalent of applause or approval rippling through the chamber. The SH carrier's mandibles clicked rapidly in what the translation system identified as extreme amusement. Even the normally reserved Nera delegate's crystalline body chimed in a pattern suggesting entertainment. Okonkwo waited. She had been waiting for 6 hours now, standing on the obsidian podium in a chamber full of beings who viewed her species as amusing children playing at civilization. Her feet ached. Her throat was dry. The formal diplomatic uniform she wore was designed for appearances rather than comfort, and the recycled air of the chamber had given her a mild headache that pulsed behind her eyes with each heartbeat. None of this showed on her face. "If I may," she said, when the laughter had subsided, "I would like to address some concerns raised about our fleet's capabilities." "By all means." Varental settled back into his seat, his scales rippling with a pattern that the translation system identified as condescending patience. "Enlighten us, Ambassador. Explain how your 12 primitive vessels with their quaint kinetic weapons represent a meaningful contribution to galactic security. I did not say our fleet represents a meaningful contribution to galactic security, Okonkwo replied. I said, we have demonstrated the ability to defend ourselves. There is a distinction. A semantic one, perhaps. Perhaps. Okonkwo paused, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. An observer might have described it as the faintest ghost of a smile, though it touched her eyes more than her lips. Hi, Exarch. May I ask you a question? Varenthal's bioluminescent eyes flickered with surprise. Applicant species rarely deviated from prepared remarks, and they almost never addressed council members directly in this manner. You may ask. I do not guarantee an answer. Why do you assume that the fleet we have shown you represents the entirety of humanity's naval capability? Silence fell over the chamber. It was not the silence of confusion or uncertainty. It was the silence of beings who had not expected question and were uncertain how to respond. Ambassador, Varenthal's voice carried an edge of irritation. Your fleet has been in orbit around your homeworld for 3 years. Our observation posts have tracked every launch, every construction project, every orbital assembly. We know exactly how many vessels you possess because we have watched you build them. 12 ships. This is not an assumption. It is fact. You have watched us build 12 ships, Okonkwo agreed, in orbit around Earth. The Kethari warlord's chromatophores shifted through several colors in rapid succession. What are you implying, human? I am not implying anything, warlord. I am stating a fact. You have observed our construction activities around Earth. You have cataloged our 12 vessels. You have concluded, based on this observation, that these 12 vessels represent the entirety of our military capability. Okonkwo paused. I am merely pointing out that your conclusion rests on an assumption, the assumption that what you observed is all there is to observe. Another silence, longer this time. Several delegates exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication, creating a subtle current of unease through the chamber. Ambassador Okonkwo. The speaker was a new voice, one that had remained silent throughout the proceedings. The architect, representative of the Synthesis Collective, unfolded from a resting configuration that had made it nearly invisible against the chamber's crystalline walls. Unlike the other delegates, the architect was not a biological entity. It was a machine intelligence, ancient beyond reckoning, that had achieved sapience in an era when most of the council species had not yet developed language. Its form was geometric and shifting, a tessellation of silver polygons that rearranged themselves constantly. When the architect spoke, even Varenthal fell silent. You are suggesting, the machine intelligence said, its voice carrying no emotional inflection, that humanity has constructed additional military assets beyond those we have observed. I am suggesting that observation is limited by perspective. Architect, you see what we have chosen to show you. That is not the same as seeing everything. An interesting semantic distinction. The architect's polygons shifted, forming a pattern that might have been curiosity. However, our observation posts are positioned throughout your home system. We have monitored your entire solar system for the duration of your species' spacefaring history. There is nowhere you could have constructed additional vessels without our knowledge. Within our solar system, Okonkwo said, yes. The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. It was not a physical change, merely the collective tension of 400 beings suddenly paying very close attention to a small human woman on an obsidian podium. What are you saying? Varenthal demanded. I am saying, High Exarch, that humanity achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. Humanity clearly has much to learn before they can be considered peers. With respect, Delegate, Okonkwo said, we are not requesting observer status. We are requesting full membership, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. On what grounds? Varenthal demanded. On the grounds that we have met every requirement set forth in your charter. We have achieved faster-than-light travel. We have established colonies beyond our home system. We have made peaceful contact with multiple species. And we have demonstrated the ability to defend ourselves against external threats. Defend yourselves? The Kethari warlord rose from his seat, his armor hissing as servos compensated for the movement. With this, he jabbed an armored finger at the holographic display. Ambassador, I have personally commanded fleets that would reduce your 12 ships to vapor in the time it takes me to give the order. The Kethari Imperium fields over 90,000 combat vessels. 90,000. You bring us 12 and expect us to pretend this represents meaningful capability. We are not asking you to pretend anything, Warlord Kethros. Okonkwo's voice remained level. We are asking you to accept our application for membership based on the criteria established in your own charter. The charter also requires that applicant species demonstrate the ability to contribute meaningfully to the Council's collective security. Varental interjected. 12 vessels cannot meaningfully contribute to anything except perhaps target practice for our Academy cadets. This drew the loudest response yet. Several delegates actually rose from their seats, their equivalent of applause or approval rippling through the chamber. The SH carrier's mandibles clicked rapidly in what the translation system identified as extreme amusement. Even the normally reserved Nera delegate's crystalline body chimed in a pattern suggesting entertainment. Okonkwo waited. She had been waiting for 6 hours now, standing on the obsidian podium in a chamber full of beings who viewed her species as amusing children playing at civilization. Her feet ached. Her throat was dry. The formal diplomatic uniform she wore was designed for appearances rather than comfort, and the recycled air of the chamber had given her a mild headache that pulsed behind her eyes with each heartbeat. None of this showed on her face. "If I may," she said when the laughter had subsided, "I would like to address some concerns raised about our fleet's capabilities." "By all means." Varental settled back into his seat, his scales rippling with a pattern that the translation system identified as condescending patience. "Enlighten us, Ambassador. Explain how your 12 primitive vessels with their quaint kinetic weapons represent a meaningful contribution to galactic security." "I did not say our fleet represents a meaningful contribution to galactic security," Okonkwo replied. "I said we have demonstrated the ability to defend ourselves. There is a distinction. A semantic one, perhaps." "Perhaps." Okonkwo paused, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. An observer might have described it as the faintest ghost of a smile, though it touched her eyes more than her lips. "Hi, Exarch. May I ask you a question?" Varental's bioluminescent eyes flickered with surprise. Applicant species rarely deviated from prepared remarks, and they almost never addressed council members directly in this manner. "You may ask. I do not guarantee an answer. Why do you assume that the fleet we have shown you represents the entirety of humanity's naval capability?" Silence fell over the chamber. It was not the silence of confusion or uncertainty. It was a silence of beings who had not expected a question and were uncertain how to respond. "Ambassador," Varental's voice carried an edge of irritation. "Your fleet has been in orbit around your homeworld for 3 years. Our observation posts have tracked every launch, every construction project, every orbital assembly. We know exactly how many vessels you possess because we have watched you build them. 12 ships. This is not an assumption. It is fact. You have watched us build 12 ships," Okonkwo agreed, "in orbit around Earth." The Kethari warlord's chromatophores shifted through several colors in rapid succession. "What are you implying, human?" "I am not implying anything, Warlord. I am stating a fact. You have observed our construction activities around Earth. You have cataloged our 12 vessels. You have concluded, based on this observation, that these 12 vessels represent the entirety of our military capability." Okonkwo paused. "I am merely pointing out that your conclusion rests on an assumption, the assumption that what you observed is all there is to observe." Another silence, longer this time. Several delegates exchanged glances, their various forms of nonverbal communication, creating a subtle current of unease through the chamber. "Ambassador Okonkwo." The speaker was a new voice, one that had remained silent throughout the proceedings. The architect, representative of the Synthesis Collective, unfolded from a resting configuration that had made it nearly invisible against the chamber's crystalline walls. Unlike the other delegates, the architect was not a biological entity. It was a machine intelligence, ancient beyond reckoning. that had achieved sapience in an era when most of the Council species had not yet developed language. Its form was geometric and shifting, a tessellation of silver polygons that rearranged themselves constantly. When the architect spoke, even Varental fell silent. "You are suggesting," the machine intelligence said, its voice carrying no emotional inflection, "that humanity has constructed additional military assets beyond those we have observed." "I am suggesting that observation is limited by perspective. Architect, you see what we have chosen to show you. That is not the same as seeing everything." An interesting semantic distinction. The architect's polygon shifted, forming a pattern that might have been curiosity. "However, our observation posts are positioned throughout your home system. We have monitored your entire solar system for the duration of your species' spacefaring history. There is nowhere you could have constructed additional vessels without our knowledge." Within our solar system, Okonkwo said, "Yes." The temperature in the chamber seemed to drop several degrees. It was not a physical change, merely the collective tension of 400 beings suddenly paying very close attention to a small human woman on an obsidian podium. "What are you saying?" Varental demanded. "I am saying, High Exarch, that humanity achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were brutal things, angular and heavy, covered in armor plating and weapon batteries. They were ships designed for one purpose and one purpose alone. 7,000 vessels," Okonkwo said into the shocked silence. 7,214 to be precise. Crews totaling approximately 3 million personnel. Combined firepower sufficient to reduce this planet's surface to molten glass approximately 6 times over. She paused, allowing the numbers to sink in. "This is humanity's fleet, High Exarch. I apologize for the confusion caused by our earlier presentation." The chamber had gone completely silent. No clicks, no whistles, no subsonic rumbles. Even the architect had frozen, its polygons locked in a fixed pattern as it processed the impossible data flooding its sensors. The presiding authority itself seemed to flicker, its form destabilizing momentarily before reasserting itself. "How?" The word came from multiple delegates simultaneously, a chorus of disbelief that the translation system struggled to process. "How do we build them?" Okonkwo shook her head slightly. "We are not going to tell you that. How do we hide them? By being patient. By understanding that you would watch our home system closely, and by building our fleet somewhere you never thought to look. How do we crew them? By being numerous. Humanity's population has exceeded 15 billion for decades. Finding 3 million volunteers for military service was not difficult. This is impossible," Varental said. His voice had lost its earlier confidence, replaced by something that sounded almost like fear. "You cannot have built this fleet in 30 years. You cannot have hidden it from our sensors. This is a trick, some form of projection, or Warlord Kethros." Okonkwo's gaze shifted to Kethari Commander. "I believe your flagship is currently in orbit around Veth Prime's second moon, the Unconquerable Vengeance, if my intelligence is correct. 4,700 crew, 16 heavy plasma batteries. The pride of your fleet." She paused. "If this is a trick, if these ships are not real, then you have nothing to fear. Order your vessel to fire upon the nearest human ship. See what happens." Kethros did not move. His chromatophores had frozen in a pattern that suggested complete cognitive paralysis. "No." Okonkwo's voice held no mockery, no triumph. It was simply calm, matter-of-fact, the voice of someone stating obvious truths. "Then perhaps we can agree that this fleet is real. Perhaps we can proceed with our discussion on that basis." "What discussion?" The presiding authority's voice cut through the shock, its dimensional instability becoming more pronounced with each word. "You have arrived at the seat of galactic governance with an invasion fleet. There can be no discussion after this. There is only war." "No." Okonkwo shook her head firmly. "There is no war. We have not fired a single weapon. We have not issued a single threat. We have simply revealed capabilities that you assumed we did not possess. If showing strength is an act of war, then every fleet in this system should be considered hostile, including the 97 Kethari warships currently in orbit around Veth Prime's rings. That is different," Is it? Alconquo's voice hardened slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. The Kethari brought nearly 100 warships to a diplomatic session. The Vortani have 4 orbital defense platforms currently targeting my shuttle. The SH carrier deployed sensor-blocking drones around this entire sector. Every major power in this chamber came prepared for violence. High Exarch. The only difference is that you did not expect humanity to do the same. We came prepared because we do not trust primitives with delusions of adequacy. Kethros growled. His chromatophores had begun shifting again, cycling through patterns of aggression and uncertainty. We came prepared because every spacefaring species eventually learns their place, and some of them learn violently. And some of them, Alconquo replied, refuse to learn at all. She turned back to the full assembly, her gaze sweeping across the gathered delegates. Most of them were still staring at the tactical display, watching the impossible fleet hold position in perfect formation around the gas giant. 7,000 ships, more firepower than most species could field in their entire history, built in secret over 3 decades by a species the galaxy had dismissed as irrelevant. Let me be clear about what is happening here. Alconquo said, humanity is requesting full membership in the Galactic Council. This request is not a threat. It is not an ultimatum. It is a request made in good faith, based on the criteria established in your charter. We have achieved faster than light travel. We have established colonies beyond our home system. We have made peaceful contact with multiple species. And we have demonstrated, quite definitively, the ability to defend ourselves. You have demonstrated the ability to attack us, Varental said. No, I have demonstrated that we could attack you if we chose to. There is a difference. If we wished to attack, we would not have announced ourselves. We would not have positioned our fleet in visible orbit around a gas giant, waiting to be detected. We would have struck without warning, used the element of surprise to maximize damage, and left no survivors to report what had happened. Alconquo's voice remained level, almost gentle. That is how humans wage war, High Exarch. That is what 30,000 years of conflict have taught us. We do not posture. We do not threaten. We act decisively and completely. And when we are finished, there is nothing left to resist. Then why? Because we do not want war. Alconquo spread her hands, a gesture of openness that seemed almost absurd given the circumstances. We want membership. We want trade. We want allies and technology sharing, and the opportunity to learn from civilizations far older and wiser than ourselves. We want everything you have been dangling before us for 3 decades. Everything you promised we could have if only we prove ourselves worthy. Her voice hardened again. We have proved ourselves. That is what this fleet represents. Not a threat, but proof. Proof that humanity is not a collection of primitives to be patronized and dismissed. Proof that we belong in this chamber at this table as equals. Equals. The architect spoke for the first time since the fleet appeared, its polygonal form shifting in patterns that suggested intense analysis. You believe this display makes you our equals. I believe this display removes any excuse you have for treating us as inferiors. Those are not the same thing. No, Alconquo agreed. They are not, but they will have to be close enough. The architect's form expanded, filling more of the chamber than it had occupied before. Its processing capacity was fully engaged now, analyzing the tactical situation, modeling potential outcomes, calculating probabilities with the cold precision of a mind that had been performing such calculations for longer than most civilizations had existed. You have placed this council in an impossible position, Ambassador. If we accept your membership now, it will appear that we did so under threat of violence. If we reject it, you have demonstrated the capacity to enforce your will through force of arms. Either outcome damages the foundation of trust upon which this institution is built. With respect, architect, that foundation was damaged long before I arrived. Alconquo's voice carried no accusation, merely observation. For 30 years, humanity has petitioned this council for membership. For 30 years, we have been told that we are not ready, that our technology is too primitive, that our ships are too few. For 30 years, We have been laughed at, dismissed, and treated as entertainment by civilizations that refuse to see us as anything more than amusing novelties. Membership requires unanimous approval from the founding species. Varental interjected. That is charter law. We cannot simply waive a requirement because you have presented a compelling threat. I am not asking you to waive anything. I am asking you to vote. Vote on our membership application. Here, now, according to the procedures established in your charter. Okonkwo gestured at the assembled delegates. Every founding species is represented in this chamber. You have the authority to approve or deny our application by majority vote. I am asking you to hold that vote. And if we deny it, the presiding authority's form had stabilized somewhat, though it still flickered at the edges. If the majority decides that humanity is not worthy of membership, even with your fleet hanging over our heads, then we will leave. Okonkwo's voice was simple, direct. We will take our fleet and return to human space. We will build more ships. We will expand our territory. We will continue to grow and develop outside the Council's authority and protection until such time as you reconsider your decision. You would not attack? Not for being denied membership. No, that is not cause for war. Okonkwo paused, and something cold entered her voice. Other actions might be, if the Council decides to take punitive measures against humanity for the crime of existing without your permission, we will respond. If any member species attempts to contain, suppress, or eliminate our civilization, we will respond. If you try to make us pay for showing you strength instead of weakness, we will respond. But denial of membership by itself is not an act of aggression. We will accept it and move forward. You expect us to believe that? Kethros demanded. You bring an invasion fleet to our doorstep and expect us to believe you will simply leave if we say no? I expect you to believe what you choose to believe, Warlord. I am telling you what will happen. Whether you believe it is your concern, not mine. The chamber fell into a tense silence. On the tactical display, the human fleet continued to hold position, 7,000 vessels arrayed in perfect formation like a steel barrier against the stars. The various council species studied the formation, their tactical experts no doubt analyzing every aspect of the human ships, trying to assess capabilities, identify weaknesses, calculate odds. Some would be reassured by their analyses. The Kethari had 90,000 ships. The combined forces of the Council numbered in the millions. Surely, they would think, this human fleet could be overwhelmed. But Okonkwo knew what they would find when they ran their calculations. She knew because she had run the same calculations herself years ago when the fleet was first being planned. The human ships were not elegant. They were not sophisticated by Council standards. They lacked energy shields. They lacked plasma weapons. They lacked the quantum processing systems that made Council vessels so tactically flexible. They were, by every objective measure, technologically inferior to their potential opponents. They were also absolutely covered in weapons. Every human vessel in that fleet mounted more kinetic batteries than a Kethari battleship. Every one carried magazines filled with enough ammunition to sustain combat operations for weeks without resupply. Every one was armored with layers of composite plating designed to absorb and disperse energy weapon impacts, to keep fighting even after damage that would cripple more sophisticated ships. They were built to take punishment and keep firing, to overwhelm enemy defenses through sheer volume of fire, to turn space battles into wars of attrition that favored the side with more guns and more ammunition. And 7,000 of them were currently pointed at the heart of galactic civilization. I will put it to a vote, the presiding authority said finally. Its voice had steadied, though its form still flickered with dimensional instability. The question before this council is simple. Shall the species known as humanity be granted full membership, with all rights and responsibilities thereof? A majority of founding species must vote in favor for the application to be approved. This is madness, Varental protested. We cannot hold such a vote under these conditions. The presence of that fleet makes any decision illegitimate. The presence of your fleet, High Exarch, has been a factor in council deliberations for millennia. The presence of the Kethari fleet has shaped policy since before most species in this chamber achieved spaceflight. This institution has always operated in the shadow of military power. Today is no different. The presiding authority's form solidified slightly, taking on a more humanoid shape than it had worn before. The vote will proceed. Founding species, make your positions known. The voting began. The Vortani voted against as expected. Varental's scales flashed with angry patterns as he registered his species' rejection of human membership. His statement was brief and bitter, citing the unacceptable precedent of admitting a species that had demonstrated such flagrant disregard for diplomatic norms. The Kethari also voted against. Kethros' chromatophores displayed colors that the translation system struggled to process, but his verbal statement was clear. Humanity had proven itself aggressive, deceptive, and dangerous. Such traits had no place in the Council. The SH carry voted against. Delegate Thrix's compound eyes seemed to bore into Alconquo as he delivered his rejection, his mandibles clicking in patterns that suggested deep personal offense at the way the humans had concealed their capabilities. 3 votes against. Alconquo stood impassive, counting silently in her head. The Nerith voted in favor. The chamber went silent. The crystalline delegate's chiming form produced sounds that the translation system rendered as, "Humanity has demonstrated capability, determination, and strategic vision. These are qualities we should welcome, not fear. We vote yes." The architect voted in favor. Its polygonal form remained neutral, but its statement was pragmatic. The mathematics are clear. Humanity represents a significant power that will continue to grow regardless of this council's decision. Integration serves collective interests better than exclusion. We vote yes. 2 in favor, 3 against. 42 species remained. The voting continued. Some delegates voted quickly, their positions apparently predetermined. Others deliberated, conferring with advisors via private communication channels, watching the tactical display with expressions that ranged from fear to calculation. The human fleet held its position throughout, neither advancing nor retreating, simply existing as a silent reminder of the choice before them. The Valdrani voted in favor. Their representative, a being whose body consisted of interlinked clusters of gaseous matter, stated simply that strength deserves recognition. The Karathi voted against. Their delegate, a diminutive figure covered in bioluminescent patches, expressed concern about the precedent of rewarding concealment and deception. The Marexi voted in favor, though their representative seemed almost physically pained by the decision. "We do not approve of these methods," they stated, "but we recognize the reality they have created." The count seesawed back and forth. 9 in favor, 11 against, 14 in favor, 16 against. Each vote felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the chamber as the outcome remained uncertain. Alconquo watched without expression. Her hands remained steady at her sides, her posture relaxed, her breathing calm. Inside, she felt the tension coiling tighter with each announcement, felt the weight of 3 million lives in that fleet bearing down on her shoulders, felt the future of her entire species balanced on a knife's edge of galactic politics. She did not let any of it show. The Thessari voted in favor. They were an ancient race, nearly as old as the Vortani, and their representative spoke with the weight of millennia behind their words. "We have seen many species rise and fall. Humanity demonstrates the qualities of those who endure. We welcome them." 22 in favor, 20 against. 5 abstentions counted against the application. The voting continued. As the count approached its conclusion, Alconquo became aware of a subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere. The initial shock of the fleet's appearance was fading, replaced by something more calculated. Delegates were no longer simply reacting to the presence of human ships. They were thinking ahead, considering implications, weighing long-term strategic interests against short-term fears. This was exactly what she had hoped for. The Kethari and Vortani had dominated council politics for centuries through the simple expedient of being the biggest and strongest. Their votes had shaped policy not because their arguments were compelling, but because everyone understood what happened to species that defied them. It was a dynamic so deeply entrenched that most delegates had forgotten there was ever an alternative. Humanity's fleet was offering that alternative. If the humans were admitted to the council, the balance of power would shift. The Kethari would no longer hold unquestioned military supremacy. The Vortani would no longer control the flow of technology and trade through implied threats. Smaller species would have options they had never had before, the ability to align themselves with new power, to play factions against each other, to carve out more favorable positions for themselves. Some delegates saw this as chaos. Others saw it as opportunity. The Centauri, a species of hive-mind organisms that had always chafed under Cathari military dominance, voted in favor with enthusiasm that bordered on celebration. The Raveshur, a trading civilization that had long suffered under Vortani trade restrictions, voted in favor with barely concealed relief. The Kirith, a species of nomadic spacers who had been denied voting rights for decades despite meeting every formal requirement, voted in favor with what their translator rendered as vindictive satisfaction. 28 in favor, 22 against. 3 species remained. The Drex, a reptilian species with close ties to the Cathari, deliberated for nearly 10 minutes before finally, reluctantly, voting in favor. Their representative's explanation was simple. The galaxy is changing. We must change with it. 29 in favor. The Mority, isolationists who rarely engage with council affairs at all, abstained. Their representative offered no explanation, simply withdrawing into silent observation. 29 in favor, 23 against, 3 abstentions. 1 species remained. The presiding authority turned its flickering form toward the final delegate, a being that had remained absolutely silent throughout the entire session. The Weavers were one of the oldest races in the galaxy, their civilization predating even the Architect's awakening. They communicated through complex patterns of quantum entanglement, and their delegate, a vaguely humanoid figure wreathed in constantly shifting light, had not moved since the voting began. The Weavers have not registered a vote. The presiding authority announced. Will your species state its position? The Weaver delegate remained motionless. Then, slowly its form began to shift. The lights wreathing its body changed color, cycling through spectrums visible and invisible, encoding information in patterns that most of the delegates could not perceive, let alone interpret. When it finally spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We have watched this species called humanity for longer than they know. We watched them learn fire. We watched them learn agriculture. We watched them slaughter each other in numbers that would make the Cathari blanch, then pick themselves up and begin again. We watched them reach the stars with nothing but chemical rockets and determination, and we watched them build this fleet in the shadows of our observation, hiding in plain sight while we looked elsewhere. The chamber had gone utterly still. The Weavers rarely spoke. When they did, their words carried weight that transcended the mundane concerns of galactic politics. Humanity is dangerous, the Weaver continued. This is not opinion. It is fact. They are aggressive, deceptive, and entirely too clever for their own good. They learn too quickly. They adapt too readily. They do not know when they're supposed to give up, and they do not care when others tell them their place. Varenthal's scales rippled with vindication. Kethros's chromatophores flashed triumph. These are not reasons to exclude them, the Weaver said. These are reasons to embrace them while we still can. The chamber erupted in confused sounds, delegates trying to parse the Weaver's meaning. You think this fleet represents a threat, the Weaver continued, its voice cutting through the chaos. You look at 7,000 ships and see an invasion force. You do not see what we see. You do not see the implications. And what do you see? The presiding authority asked. We see a species that built this fleet in 30 years. 30 years. From first achieving faster-than-light travel to fielding a navy that rivals several founding members combined. We see a species that hid this accomplishment from every intelligence service in the galaxy, despite being constantly watched, despite having no apparent resources or experience in such matters. We see a species that came to this chamber not to threaten, but to ask, to follow the procedures, to play by the rules even while demonstrating the capacity to break them utterly. The Weaver's form expanded, filling the space around its podium with swirling light. We see a species that will continue to grow regardless of our decision today. We see them building more ships, expanding further, becoming stronger with each passing year. We see them doing this alone if we reject them, outside our influence, beyond our ability to guide or constrain. We see the inevitable conflict that will come when their expansion meets our borders, when their interests clash with ours, when all the tensions and resentments of rejection finally find expression in violence. The lights began to coalesce, forming patterns that hurt to look upon directly. Or we see them here, in this chamber, bound by the same rules that bind us all. We see them contributing their strength to collective security, instead of hoarding it for private wars. We see them learning from our wisdom, instead of repeating our mistakes. We see the possibility of cooperation, of mutual benefit, of a galaxy made stronger by their inclusion rather than weakened by their exclusion. The patterns resolved into something almost human-shaped, though no human had ever possessed such radiant intensity. The choice is not whether to admit humanity. The choice is when. Today, while they still ask permission, while they still value our approval enough to seek it through proper channels. Or later, after years of rejection have hardened them, after our contempt has taught them to see us as enemies rather than potential partners. Later, when they come not with requests but with demands, not with fleet's position in orbit, but with fleet's position for war. The Weaver's form stabilized, and when it spoke again, its voice carried the weight of prophecy. We vote in favor. We advise the Council to do the same. The galaxy will be better for it, or at least, it will be less worse. The vote was complete. 30 in favor, 23 against, 4 abstentions. A majority of founding species had approved humanity's application. The chamber dissolved into chaos. Varental was on his feet, his scales flashing in patterns that the translation system could not process, his voice rising above the din with furious accusations of procedural violations and implicit coercion. Kethros had activated his armor's combat systems, surrounding himself with a shimmering energy field that crackled with barely contained violence. The SH carry delegate had retreated into a defensive posture, his compound eyes tracking every movement in the chamber. But the vote had been cast. The decision was made. Alconquo stood at her podium and waited for the storm to subside. Eventually, the presiding authority managed to restore order. Its voice, amplified by systems that made it impossible to ignore, cut to the shouting and posturing with simple, implacable authority. The vote has concluded. Humanity is hereby granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities thereof. This decision is final and binding upon all member species. This is not over. Varental snarled, his bioluminescent eyes fixed on Alconquo with undisguised hatred. You have made an enemy today. Human. The Vortani do not forget. We do not forgive. I understand, High Exarch. Alconquo's voice remained calm. And I hope, in time, you'll understand that making an enemy was never my intention. Intention means nothing. Actions mean everything. You brought a fleet to threaten us into submission. That action will have consequences. I brought a fleet to demonstrate that humanity cannot be dismissed as irrelevant. If you interpret that as a threat, that interpretation is yours to make. Alconquo paused, and something in her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. But I would ask you to consider something, High Exarch. Consider that we could have done this differently. We could have built this fleet in secret and used it to carve out territory by force. We could have avoided the Council entirely, established our own sphere of influence, treated the galaxy as a resource to be exploited rather than a community to be joined. Why didn't you? Because we have read your history, High Exarch. We have studied the records of the last 17 species that attempted to establish themselves through force outside Council authority. We know what happened to them. We know how they ended, alone and surrounded, their fleets scattered, their worlds burned, their populations scattered to the winds. Alconquo's voice hardened slightly. We did not want that. We wanted this. Membership, legitimacy, a place at the table. We wanted to prove that we belonged, not because we could destroy you, but because we could contribute to something larger than ourselves. Pretty words, Kethros growled. They do not change what your fleet represents. My fleet represents exactly what I said it represents. Proof. Proof that humanity is not to be dismissed. Proof that we are capable of defending ourselves. Proof that we have earned the right to be treated as equals. Alconquo spread her hands. If you choose to see it as a threat, you can spend the next century building your forces against us. planning for a war that I hope will never come. Or you can see it for what it is, an invitation. An invitation to what? To partnership, to alliance, to the kind of cooperation that benefits everyone involved. Okonkwo's voice softened slightly. Humanity has learned many things in our short history. Warlord, we have learned that strength alone is not enough. We have learned that enemies can become friends given time and opportunity. We have learned that the best victories are the ones that never require a battle at all. You lecture us on war? Kethros's chromatophore shifted through colors that suggested incredulity and offense. Your species has existed for the blink of an eye by galactic standards. What could you possibly teach us about conflict? Nothing about conflict itself, perhaps, but something about its aftermath. Okonkwo gestured at the holographic display, where the human fleet still held its silent vigil around the gas giant. Look at those ships, Warlord. Each one represents not just weapons and armor, but crew, families, communities of people who left everything behind to serve their species in the void between stars. They did not do this because they wanted war. They did this because they wanted to ensure that war would never be necessary. A distinction without a difference. Only if you believe that preparing for conflict means desiring it. We prepare for conflict because we learned, through bitter experience, that peace cannot be maintained by those who lack the strength to defend it. We built this fleet not to wage war, but to prevent it. And now that it exists, we are offering to use that strength in service of this council's collective security. How generous, Parental said, his voice dripping with contempt. Humanity offers to protect us with the very weapons they brought to threaten us. We offer to contribute our capabilities to the common defense, exactly as every member species has done since the council's founding. Okonkwo's voice remained level. The Kethari contribute their warships. The Vortani contribute their technology. The Synthesis Collective contributes their processing capacity. This is how the Council works. Each species offers what they can, and the whole becomes stronger than the sum of its parts. And what does humanity offer? Okonkwo smiled. It was the first time her expression had changed significantly throughout the entire session, and several delegates found the expression more unsettling than her previous composure. We offer perspective, high exarch. We offer the viewpoint of a species that has lived its entire existence knowing it might end at any moment. We offer the urgency of beings who cannot afford to wait centuries for results, who must solve problems in decades instead of millennia. We offer creativity born from desperation, innovation driven by necessity, and determination forged in the knowledge that we have always been alone against a universe that does not care whether we survive. The smile faded, replaced by something harder, more serious. We also offer this fleet. 7,000 ships ready to defend Council space against any external threat. Crews trained to a standard that would make your academy instructors weep with envy. Officers who have studied every conflict in your history and learned lessons you might have forgotten. All of this offered freely in exchange for membership and the rights it provides. And if we refuse, if the Council decides that your membership, granted under these circumstances, should be revoked, then we will leave, as I said earlier, but we will remember. Okonkwo's voice dropped slightly, taking on an edge that had not been there before. We will remember who voted against us. We will remember who spoke against us. We will remember every insult, every dismissal, every laugh at our expense. And when the next crisis comes, when the next threat emerges from the dark between stars, we will remember that you did not want us here. Is that a threat? It is a statement of fact. Memory shapes behavior. The way you treat us now will shape how we treat you in the future. That is not a threat. It is human nature. The chamber fell silent again. On the tactical display, the human fleet continued to hold its position, unmoved and unmoving, a silent testament to capabilities that could no longer be denied. I believe, the presiding authority said finally, that we have reached an impasse. Humanity has been granted membership. The vote was legitimate, the majority clear. Whatever concerns remain, they must be addressed through proper council channels, not through continued debate in this chamber. The Kethari Imperium formally protests this decision. Kethro said, "We reserve the right to seek remedial measures through appropriate mechanisms." The Vortani Ascendancy echoes this protest, Varental added. We do not recognize the legitimacy of a vote conducted under military duress. Your protests are noted and will be recorded in the official proceedings, the presiding authority replied. The decision stands. Okonkwo stepped down from the podium for the first time in over 6 hours. Her legs ached. Her throat burned from the recycled air. The headache that had been building behind her eyes now pounded with each heartbeat. None of this showed in her movements, which remained smooth and controlled as she walked toward the chamber's exit. She paused at the door and turned back to face the assembled delegates. Humanity did not come here to make enemies, she said. We came here to join a community, to contribute what we can, to learn from those who've been traveling the stars longer than we have been aware they existed. We came here in good faith, offering partnership and cooperation. Her gaze swept across the chamber, lingering for a moment on each delegate who had voted against her. That offer remains open. To everyone, the past 6 hours do not need to define the next 6 centuries. We can choose to build something better than suspicion and resentment. We can choose to see each other as potential partners rather than potential enemies. Her voice softened slightly. Or we can choose otherwise. The decision is yours. She turned and walked through the door. Behind her, in a crystalline chamber that had stood for 11,000 years, the delegates of the Galactic Council sat in stunned silence, watching the tactical display where humanity's fleet continued its patient vigil. 7,000 ships, 3 million crew, enough firepower to reshape the balance of power in the galaxy. And somewhere in that fleet, in a command center buried deep within the flagship, Admiral James Chin watched the same display from the other side. He was an older man, his hair gray and his face lined with years of service. He had commanded vessels since before most of his crew were born, risen through ranks that had not existed when he joined the service, and now found himself at the head of a fleet that should have been impossible. That was impossible by every standard the galaxy had established for what newly spacefaring species could accomplish. The impossibility of it never failed to amuse him. Ambassador Okonkwo's shuttle is away, his communications officer reported. She's requesting permission to board. Granted. Have the honor guard ready to receive her at Base 7. Chin leaned back in his command chair, studying the tactical display. Status of Council forces? No significant movement, Admiral. The Kethari flagship has increased shield output by 12%, but they're maintaining their orbital position. The Vortani defense platforms have not changed their targeting parameters. Good. They're being smart about this. Chin allowed himself a small smile. Smart enough to know that posturing won't change anything at this point. Sir, we're receiving a wide-beam transmission from the council chamber. It's marked as official proceedings. Let me see it. The display shifted, showing a transcript of the vote and the formal announcement of humanity's membership. Chin read through it in silence, his expression revealing nothing. So it worked, his executive officer said. Commander Sarah Martinez was a tall woman with sharp features and sharper eyes, recruited from the intelligence services specifically for her ability to read situations that others found opaque. They actually voted us in. They did. You don't sound surprised. I'm not. Chun turned his chair slightly, facing his exo directly. We gave them a choice between admitting us voluntarily or dealing with us as an external power they couldn't control. Most species, when presented with that choice, will take the option that lets them feel like they're in control. Voting yes lets them pretend they made a decision. Voting no means admitting they were simply responding to force. You gambled 3 million lives on psychology. I gambled 3 million lives on 30 years of intelligent analysis, strategic modeling, and very careful preparation. Chen's voice hardened slightly. And I gambled them because the alternative was watching humanity spend the next few centuries as a second-class civilization, marginalized and dismissed until the first real crisis gave someone an excuse to eliminate us entirely. You really think they would have done that? I think they've done it before. The Council's history is full of species that failed to establish themselves before more powerful civilizations decided they were inconvenient. Chun turned back to the display. We were determined not to be one of them. And now we have a seat at the table, a voice in the council, the same rights as every other member species. Chun paused. And a fleet that no one could ignore. The Cathari are not happy about this. The Cathari have been the dominant military power in this galaxy for 3,000 years. Of course they're not happy. We just demonstrated that their dominance is no longer guaranteed. They might do something about that. They might try. Chen's smile returned, colder this time. But they would have to be very sure of the outcome before they risked it. And right now, they're not sure of anything except that their intelligence services failed to detect 7,000 warships being built in their own backyard. About that, sir. Martinez hesitated. An unusual tell for someone of her training. The Council is going to want to know how we did it, where we built the ships, how we hid them. They're going to investigate. Let them investigate. Chun waved a hand dismissively. They won't find anything we don't want them to find. And what do we want them to find? Enough to satisfy their curiosity, not enough to replicate what we did. Chen's expression grew contemplative. The real secret isn't where we built the fleet. It's why we were able to build it at all. It's the manufacturing techniques, the training programs, the logistics systems that let us maintain 3 million personnel in deep space for years at a time without resupply. Those are the things that give us our real advantage, and those are the things we're going to protect very carefully. You're planning for the long game. I'm always planning for the long game. Commander, today was a victory, an important one, but it's not the end. It's barely even the beginning. The beginning of what, sir? Chun was silent for a long moment, watching the tactical display, where his fleet held its position around the gas giant. 7,000 ships, 3 million crew, the culmination of 30 years of secret preparation, hidden construction, and very careful planning. The beginning of humanity's real role in this galaxy, he said finally. We spent 30 years proving we can survive. Now we start proving we can thrive. And if the other powers try to stop us, then they'll learn what the Council learned today. That humanity is not to be underestimated. That we do not give up. That we do not give in. Chen's voice dropped barely above a whisper. And that physics is on our side. The reference made Martinez smile despite herself. It was an old joke among the fleet, one that dated back to the earliest days of humanity's space program. The aliens had their energy shields and plasma weapons, their quantum processing systems and gravity manipulation technology. Humanity had Isaac Newton. And Newton, as any physicist would tell you, was a very unforgiving teacher. The shuttle carrying Ambassador Okonkwo docked with the flagship 30 minutes after leaving the council chamber. She was met by the honor guard Chun had ordered, a formation of Marines in full combat dress that would have seemed ridiculous anywhere else but felt entirely appropriate here. She walked through the corridors of the flagship with her escort, noting the differences between this vessel and the diplomatic courier that had brought her to Veth Prime 3 weeks ago. The courier had been comfortable, almost luxurious by military standards, designed to impress visiting dignitaries with humanity's sophistication and culture. This ship was nothing like that. This ship was a weapon, pure and simple, and everything about its design reflected that purpose. The corridors were narrow, optimized for crew movement during combat rather than aesthetic appeal. The walls were lined with emergency equipment, damage control stations, and weapons lockers positioned at regular intervals. The crew members she passed wore practical uniforms and expressions of focused competence, their movements efficient and purposeful. This was a warship, a real one, and it was surrounded by 6,999 others just like it. The Admiral was waiting for her on the command deck, standing beside the central holographic display that showed the tactical situation around Veth Prime. He looked tired, she thought, tired but satisfied, like a craftsman viewing a completed masterpiece after years of painstaking labor. Ambassador, he offered a formal salute, which she returned with a civilian equivalent. Admiral, I believe congratulations are in order. The congratulations belong to you, Ambassador. We provided the demonstration. You made the argument. I'm not sure there was much argument involved. Okonkwo moved to stand beside him, studying the tactical display. Mostly I just pointed at your ships and waited for them to finish being shocked. Sometimes that's all the argument you need. Sometimes. She was quiet for a moment, watching the dance of signatures on the display. They're going to investigate. The Vortani and Cathari, at least. They're going to send probes, scout ships, intelligence operatives. They're going to try to figure out how we did this. Let them. You're not concerned? I'm always concerned, Ambassador, but not about their investigation. Chun gestured at the display. This fleet took 30 years to build. Not because it was technically difficult. We had the industrial capacity after the first decade, but because we needed to develop new ways of thinking, new approaches to logistics, new training methods, new doctrines for operating in environments we had never experienced before. And those are harder to steal than ship designs. Much harder. You can copy a blueprint. You can't copy institutional knowledge. You can't steal the lessons we learned from 1,000 failed experiments. You can't replicate the culture we built from generations of deliberate effort. Chin turned to face her directly. The Cathari can build ships like ours if they reverse engineer the technology. But they can't build crews like ours without changing who they are as a species. That sounds almost arrogant, Admiral. It's not arrogance if it's true. Chin smiled slightly, and it's been tested thoroughly enough that we're confident in the assessment. Tested how? We've been running simulations for decades, war games against every major power in the Council, using the best intelligence we could gather about their capabilities and doctrine. The results were instructive. Instructive how? We lose, Ambassador, consistently. In almost every scenario where the conflict extends beyond the initial engagement, we eventually lose. We don't have the numbers. We don't have the industrial base. We don't have the strategic depth. Okonkwo frowned. Then how? We win the initial engagement, consistently, overwhelmingly, because our ships are designed for exactly one thing, doing maximum damage in minimum time. We hit hard, we hit fast, and we don't stop until the fight is over. In a short engagement, we have significant advantages. In a long war, we have none. So your plan relies on never fighting a long war. My plan relies on convincing everyone else that fighting us at all is more trouble than it's worth. Today was step one of that plan. Chun turned back to the display. We showed them what we could do. We demonstrated capability without using it, and we made it clear that the cost of opposing us would be very, very high. Some of them will still try. Chun agreed, and when they do, we'll demonstrate again, more directly if necessary. His expression hardened. But I hope it won't come to that. I hope today's demonstration was convincing enough that the next few decades can be spent building relationships instead of fighting wars. That's a strange thing to hear from the commander of an invasion fleet. I prefer to think of it as a negotiation fleet. Chen's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. Invasion implies hostile intent. We're not hostile, Ambassador. We're just prepared. Prepared for what? For whatever happens next. The days following humanity's admission to the Council were chaotic, as expected. The Cathari lodged formal protests. The Vortani demanded investigations. The SHK called for emergency sessions to discuss the human threat. Each complaint was duly noted, officially acknowledged, and effectively ignored by the majority of Council species who had voted in favor of membership. The human fleet remained in orbit around Veth 7 for 3 weeks, a constant presence on every sensor display in the system. Then gradually it began to disperse. Ships peeled away from the formation in groups of dozens, then hundreds, heading for destinations throughout human space. Within a month, only a token force remained, a few hundred vessels maintaining what Ambassador Okonkwo described as a visible commitment to Council security. But the memory of those 7,000 ships lingered. In the trading posts of the Outer Rim, merchants began to revise their assessments of human goods. The primitives who produce chemical-powered vehicles and projectile weapons might be more sophisticated than previously assumed. Deals that had been offered at insulting terms were renegotiated at more favorable rates. Markets that had been closed to human traders began, tentatively, to open. In the research facilities of the core worlds, scientists scrambled to analyze every scrap of data their sensors had collected during the fleet's appearance. The construction methods used in human ships were not revolutionary, but they were extremely efficient, optimized for mass production, in ways that more sophisticated designs could not match. Some researchers found this concerning. Others found it illuminating. A few found it both. In the military academies of the Cathari Imperium, a new curriculum was introduced. For the first time in 3,000 years, cadets were required to study the tactics and capabilities of a species other than the traditional rivals. The courses were called asymmetric threat assessment. Their graduates would spend careers trying to figure out how a species with inferior technology had managed to build a navy that made their own seem inadequate. And in the depths of space, in shipyards that still had not been located by any Council intelligence service, humanity continued to build. The Second Fleet began construction within days of the First Fleet's departure from Veth Prime. It was not discussed publicly. It was not announced to the Council. It was simply begun because Admiral Chun and everyone in his chain of command understood something fundamental about the galaxy they had just joined. Membership was not the end. Membership was a beginning. For 30 years, humanity had prepared for the moment when the galaxy would be forced to take them seriously. Now that moment had arrived. But survival in the Council required more than a dramatic entrance. It required constant vigilance, continuous development, the maintenance of capabilities that no one could afford to challenge. The next 30 years would determine whether humanity would merely survive in the Galactic Council or genuinely thrive. Admiral Chin intended to be ready for both possibilities. The ceremonial induction of humanity as a full member of the Galactic Council took place 6 months after the vote. It was a grand affair held in the same crystalline chamber where Ambassador Okonkwo had revealed the true scope of human capability. Delegates from all 400 member species attended, along with representatives from a dozen pending applicants and countless observers from civilizations that had not yet achieved formal diplomatic relations with the Council. Ambassador Okonkwo delivered a formal acceptance speech. She spoke of cooperation, of mutual benefit, of the bridges humanity hoped to build with its new partners. She invoked the ideals of the Council's founding charter, the commitment to peace and collective security that had sustained galactic civilization for 11 millennia. Her words were carefully chosen, meticulously diplomatic, designed to offend no one while committing humanity to nothing specific. The delegates applauded politely when she finished. High Exarch Varenthal was notably absent from the ceremony. Official reports claimed he was attending to urgent matters of state in Vortani space. Unofficially, everyone understood that his absence was a deliberate snub, a message to humanity and the Council that the Vortani had not forgotten or forgiven the manner of humanity's admission. Warlord Kethros attended, though his chromatophores displayed colors that the translation system could not adequately process. He said nothing throughout the ceremony, simply watching with the focused intensity of a predator assessing prey. The architect also attended, its polygonal form occupying a larger space than usual, its sensors recording every detail of the proceedings for later analysis. When the ceremony concluded, it approached Ambassador Okonkwo with movements that somehow conveyed purpose despite lacking any biological tells. An adequate beginning, the machine intelligence said, though the true test will come in the years ahead. I agree, Okonkwo replied. We have proven we can join. Now we must prove we can belong. A distinction many species fail to appreciate. The architect's polygons shifted through patterns that might have indicated contemplation. Your species has made a strong first impression. Strong impressions can be both advantage and liability. How so? Those who oppose you will never stop looking for weakness. Those who support you will expect continued strength. Both paths create pressure. Both paths create opportunity for failure. And those who remain neutral will wait to see how you handle the pressure before committing to either position. The architect's form contracted slightly, a sign that its attention was being drawn elsewhere. I have analyzed your species extensively, Ambassador. Your history, your psychology, your patterns of behavior. I have run simulations projecting your likely development over the next several centuries. And what did you conclude? That humanity is unpredictable, not randomly, so your actions follow logical patterns given your circumstances, but unpredictable in a way that most species are not. You adapt faster than your biology should allow. You cooperate and compete in patterns that do not match your genetic programming. You hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously and somehow function despite the inconsistency. Is that good or bad? It is interesting. The architect's form began to move away. I look forward to observing how your unpredictability manifests in the Council's political environment. It should provide valuable data. You're very honest, architect. Deception serves no purpose when dealing with a species that already suspects it. Better to be straightforward and let your own conclusions guide your behavior. The machine paused at the door. A piece of advice, Ambassador, offered freely and without obligation. The Council's political structure is designed to maintain equilibrium. It rewards stability and punishes disruption. Your species is inherently disruptive. Learning to disrupt selectively will be essential to your long-term success. I'll keep that in mind. See that you do. The architect departed, leaving Okonkwo alone in the ceremonial chamber. She stood for a long moment, looking at the crystalline walls that had witnessed 11,000 years of galactic history. Empires had risen and fallen in this chamber. Wars have been declared and ended. Species have been welcomed into the community of civilizations and, occasionally, expelled from it. The weight of that history pressed down on her, a reminder that humanity's admission was merely the latest chapter in a very long story. We are here, she thought. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, we are here. Now comes the hard part. The first decade of humanity's membership in the Galactic Council was characterized by careful navigation of political currents that had been flowing for millennia before humans had developed writing. The Vortani-Cathari rivalry, the SH-Carry commercial dominance, the architect's subtle manipulation of policy through predictive analysis, all of these dynamics predated humanity and would continue regardless of human participation. The challenge was not to change this dynamic, but to exist within it without being crushed by forces that had been at work long before the first human ancestor looked up at the stars and wondered what they were. Ambassador Okonkwo remained in her position for the first 7 years of membership. She became the face of humanity on the council, a calm, unflappable, unprovocative representative of a species that many still considered dangerous upstarts. She was replaced by David Chun, a distant relative of the Admiral, a man of gentle manners and iron will, who continued the course of cautious integration. During that first decade, humanity did what no one expected it to do. It began to listen.